Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Last time we talked about all the pros of the Delmarva Peninsula theory of the Book of Mormon. This time we're going to get into some of the skeptics' questions. How does Laura Hathaway handle those questions? You don't want to miss our conversation. Check it out.
Well, all the questions I have are more the skeptical type questions.
Good. That's what I want to hear.
Okay, so silk. You got silk?
I don't know. I haven't really studied the silk part, but they did have things that the colonists said they looked like lace, like they were so intricate. So they had something that, I don't think it was silk, but they were just saying like they definitely took their attire. But yeah, you're right. Your silks per se, I don't know. I haven't really found that one.
Okay, sorry. Elephants and horses.
Same thing as like in the Heartland theory. They're finding more and more.
So the jury's still out on that kind of stuff?
Well, I mean, the native people believe they're horses. There's articles that people dismiss, or they believe that the natives believed that they had horses before. I think I've seen more and more things being posted about that in North America, especially Canada. Like they had, I think there's like a little horse that still, they say is one of the originals. Jerry Grover's gonna deny that because we had a discussion on that on Facebook. But
really?
but there's just like the people themselves believed, like the natives believed that they had horses before Columbus. So just the same as any Heartland people, I guess, would claim. But yeah, the Macedons are finding they're more and more closer to Jaredite time than.
Well, because I know there are some horses and some elephants even in Baja, but the problem is they date to like 20,000 years ago, so they're in the wrong time period.
Yeah. It's just finding one that's closer.
Right, and so that's a big deal.
Right.
So you mentioned kind of a 10-inch knife, like a copper thing. I know Wayne May supposedly found.
So that was found at Pig Point. They say it was in Adena, so kind of earlier. Or around the Book of Mormon time.
So do you kind of lean with the Hopewell and the Adena type people?
I think that there was probably people already there, but the Nephites came and they interacted with them, and so you're going to get influences of Nephites in the Hopewell for sure. They would definitely have been in that same area.
On the one hand, Thomas Murphy has said, Joseph Smith looking at the mounds and that sort of thing, the mound builder myths and culture and things like that, that's what he had imagined the Book of Mormon people were. But, when Nephi talks about building a temple like unto Solomon, the Hopewell don't really fit, like they don't have any nice temples like unto Solomon.
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, and even me, like I don't say that has to be a stone temple. It could be the dimensions, and they could have accessorized it as best as they could. But I think it's more like the square footage and how
shouldn't the building, look like it? Because we don't have any Semitic-looking buildings in the Americas.
Yeah.
Do we?
Yeah.
You agree? Okay.
I agree with that.
Okay. DNA, that's a big issue, right?
I just go with the church history or the church essay on that one, and
so you think it died out, basically?
Well, no, I just think we just can't conclude either way. We can't use the DNA evidence. Like, it's just more complicated than people think. And my dad, he wrote this book, and he has DNA. He uses the Heartland DNA.
So is that a Heartland book there?
No, but he has like Meso and Heartland stuff in there. This is just his notes. This is just his little notes that he's accumulated over the years. And I just don't think that there's evidence, or I don't think it says either way, just like the church essay states. I'm going with that.
Okay. So yeah, because I interviewed Ugo. Did you see that interview?
Probably.
It was like one of my first ones. First year of my interviews. Because one of the things he said is 90% of the Native American DNA was killed by the white people. So that's just your explanation, is the DNA has basically disappeared?
I took genetics 20 years ago. That's like my understanding of it, but I do know that you can have a sibling with less DNA than someone that looks like a different race than you. Like, we're 99.999% the same. So I guess it depends if you're looking at mitochondrial DNA or what the whole thing is. I'm not a DNA expert. I just know that like you can have siblings that look less like you or genetically than someone that's not as related. So it's really hard to make those conclusions in my mind that it's died out or that it's still there, because we're mostly the same. There's just these little things, and they can change within one generation. So it could be dying out. I don't know.
Okay.
Yeah. Can't compare it.
So since you mentioned Jerry Grover, let's talk about geology.
Yeah.
Are there volcanoes on the Delmarva Peninsula?
There are no volcanoes there.
So how do we get the mists of darkness and the earthquakes? Can you talk about the earthquake and the geology there?
Yeah, so I just believe it was a hurricane. I don't believe it needed to be a volcano. I think even with a volcano, you have to have, in my opinion, you have to have multiple volcanoes, because they say the volcanoes, there's lightning associated with volcanoes and tornadoes associated with volcanoes. But it says it's in the land northward and in the land southward, and it was said it was exceedingly sharp, and so that's got to be kind of close. But again, Jerry would probably dispute all that. But I think even he says that there might have been more than one volcano going off. One could have activated another one.
He investigated 200 volcanoes in Mesoamerica. I don't think you have 200 volcanoes in Delmarva.
Not that I've seen. No, but from what I read of it, it's a hurricane. It says the way hurricanes move in that area, you would have more destruction in the land northward than you would southward, because that's just how they move. They move up like this, and it has to be pretty intense for them to move down into that Delmarva area. But, it happens, but it would be more intense in the land northward, just like it says. You would have the lightning, you would have the loudness. Have you been in a windstorm? I've been paying attention to that lately, and those are loud. There can be earthquakes. I also think there could be mudslides, if you're having wind, and just look at California right now. It's showing pictures of houses on the edge because there's been so much rain and wind, and it's just it's destroying the land. And I think that could be explained through a hurricane. So
what about the mist of darkness?
It would be a storm. See, what are my thoughts on the mist of darkness?
Well, wasn't it when Jesus died, you had 3 days of darkness?
Yeah. Yeah, a storm, you definitely have darkness, but after the storm, it usually dissipates. A darkness would make logical sense with a storm. How dark does it get? Are you saying it would not last that long?
On the one hand, I can see, if you've got a lot of wind, obviously you're not going to be building a lot of fires outside. Mm-hmm. But to me, I guess I'm going to lead with what Jerry said.
Yeah.
If you've got a big ash cloud that's sucking up all the oxygen, it's going to be hard to build a fire outside. Yeah. And you don't need to worry about the wind per se of a hurricane. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. To me,
but if you're having fires, you're having the same oxygen depletion. If the city of Zarahemla is on fire, and then I don't know, you're still going to have lots of ash and those same things around, right? That Jerry says.
Yeah, but I think it's a lot different than a volcano.
Yeah.
You think of Mount St. Helens. Are you old enough to remember Mount St. Helens?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, not really, but I've heard enough about it.
I'm getting too old. I actually remember that. Because I just remember seeing news reports, and it was it's noon here, and it's just pitch black. Mm-hmm. To me, that a volcano makes more sense than, say, a hurricane as far as explaining that sort of thing. Have you checked? Is there a lot of earthquake zones?
There are earthquakes. There was one just in, I think, 2000, not that many years ago. I can't remember the exact year, 2010 or more recently, in Washington, D.C., which is right where my area is, that just kind of hurts the monument itself, and they could feel it as far north as Canada. So I think it was a 7.4 earthquake. Maybe it wasn't that much. But there are earthquakes in that area, yeah, for sure.
I don't remember that. That's weird. But
a rumbling of the land. It doesn't have to be an earthquake, but there are earthquakes there. I read it, and I can see it all being explained with the weather.
And Jerry said...
I think I'm going to have to look at the darkness thing a little bit better, because I know I've researched it and I have notes somewhere, but right now...
Okay. Because I know Jerry's... Because we talk about the Heartland Theory, one of their things is, we got the New Madrid Fault, and it caused bells to ring in Connecticut. So you're talking from the Mississippi River area. Well, that's what they think is Sidon. Your Sidon is a lot smaller than the Mississippi River.
Yes, it's more reasonable for sure.
But Jerry's like, well, look, a bell's on a pendulum. It's not going to be that hard to make a bell move. Whereas when you look at the destruction of the Book of Mormon, like entire cities are being destroyed.
Yeah.
And so a bell moving in Connecticut is not like, the whole city fell down.
Right.
So the distances are kind of too far. I mean, that's what his point is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the same point kind of applies with your theory there.
You also got to remember that I'm saying these cities are built of wood. He's saying stone. You have to have something stronger to break up his stone cities. But it only talks about cement being in the land northward. So I don't think you need to have as an intense earthquake to destroy these. So
they weren't living in teepees. They were living
in like longhouses that were made from wood. Yeah.
Okay. So if they were wood structures, I guess that would be a little easier to destroy those buildings. Okay. Trying to think of what else there is. What else do you got?
We could talk about distances. So one thing that I always think interesting is the city of Gershon. In the Book of Mormon, it says it's by the sea, which joins Bountiful, and then it also says it borders Antionum, which is in the south by the sea, by the East Sea, and the Antionum eventually is taken over by the Lamanites, and so people have Gershon. They kind of put it in the middle. It's kind of they put it inland, and then they put it. Even John Swarnson's map, he has it kind of just stuck in there because he's got to have it close to Bountiful, and he's got to have it close to Antionum, and you can't have Antionum like up here because it's the Lamanite city, and you wouldn't want it. Why would you be building all these cities by the sea, like Moroni on up, if you already have Lamanites like mingled with you, right? So I have Gershon down by Antionum, but when I read that scripture, it doesn't say that Gershon borders Bountiful. It says Gershon is by the sea, which joins Bountiful. And do you remember where I have Bountiful? It's on the other side of the sea. So it's talking about the sea is joining Bountiful, and then it says it's south.
Are you saying it's across the Chesapeake Bay?
Across the Chesapeake Bay. So Bountiful is in the Delmarva Peninsula. It's the one that's right. It's like Desolation and Bountiful that have this fall line between them. So it's right at the top of the Delmarva Peninsula is Bountiful. That's where Christ came. And what's really interesting that I one day just kind of blew my mind is if you look where we have Bountiful, it's pretty much right in the middle of the city of Nephi and Zarahemla. Like if you kind of go like this, that's where Christ came. It's right there in the middle of those two lands.
You're talking about, okay, let me make sure I understand.
Yeah,
so you've got the Delmarva Peninsula here,
yes.
And then it comes around to the Maryland side.
Yeah.
And so land Bountiful is at the top, kind of where?
It's not on, no, I don't have it on the Maryland side. I have it over on the, like above where the city of Nephi is. If you went up, you would hit Bountiful.
So it's still on the Delmarva Peninsula?
It's in the Delmarva Peninsula.
Okay.
And so when you read that scripture, it says that Gershon is by the sea, which joins Bountiful. It's talking about the sea is joining Bountiful, is how I interpret that. And because nobody else can really put Gershon in a place that makes sense unless they say, make it a huge area, like hundreds of miles long. It's just the land of Gershon, and it borders Bountiful, and it goes all the way down to Antionum because it borders Antionum. That's how everyone describes. But then remember that the Nephites gave Gershon to the people of Ammon that came over, and they just gave them like hundreds of miles of land. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. But if you read it as it's by the sea that joins Bountiful, and Bountiful is just on the other side. So it's just trying to describe the area. It's like it's by the sea, and the sea is the one that joins Bountiful, and it's south of Bountiful is where Gershon is. It makes perfect sense to me. So that's one of those like little tidbits that fits that doesn't really fit any other model.
So do you have a nice map so that you've got all the cities like pinpointed?
I have lots of maps. I need a map maker. I've tried to reach out to some people.
John Hammer, but he's busy.
Okay, yeah.
And I don't think he's a big Book of Mormon. He thinks the Book of Mormon's fiction, basically.
I know that's kind of the people that can do it don't want to do it. So I do have some Google Maps, and I've placed my cities everywhere. You can see exactly how they fit together, and I can get those to you for sure. and the distances, they work out perfect. You don't have to go far. So you have Manti that was taken over by the Lamanites at one point, and it says that they didn't dare go over the head of Sidon to Nephi-ha, and that distance is like close for where other peoples have them, 50 miles or more apart. So all of the distances just make so much more sense with this model, because you're able to cover a big area, but because they're like in different areas, it all makes sense.
Okay. So do you feel like, it sounds like you have some agreement with Heartlanders to some degree? Some of your map overlaps with theirs a little bit, right? Or not?
I guess, I go up to, I have, another thing is Ripley Income. So they have the Great Lakes and stuff. I just have the Finger Lakes as the land of many waters. And then I have Lake Ontario, which is one of the Great Lakes, is Ripley Income. In Ether, it talks about the Jaredites called this, right above the land of many waters, there's this Ripley Income that means to exceed all. And so it's this big, massive thing of water. And I think even in Meso, I don't think they have like a big event. I think the latest is they're just calling the ocean. That's what he was referring to, is Ripley Income's just the ocean and how it comes over like this. And that's what the Jaredites were referring to. But I have, so that's the same area as the Heartland up in the Finger Lakes region and the Great Lakes. To be honest, I haven't studied the Heartland a lot, because what I've seen, the distances are just so off that it doesn't make any sense to me. It just couldn't be that.
Because I've talked to Jonathan Neville about that, and he says, well, they can use a lot of rivers, Ohio, the Missouri, the Mississippi. Mm-hmm. There's lots of rivers, and so he thinks that they can cover those.
Quickly.
But you agree that you still think those are too far?
Yeah, I just think they're completely off. The couple that I've seen, they just have things completely skewed weird. So it doesn't make sense with the Book of Mormon reading at all. So not even just the distances, but just where they're placing things doesn't work.
Yeah.
Distances.
Well, I know Jerry said that the Meso is the most detailed map that you can find.
My map's more detailed. It's just not pretty. I have every city. We have gone through every city and put them. That's in the land southward. We've stuck it on there. So
I'm gonna have to get that map. I'd like to look at it. Because I think that would be good. Trying to think of what else is there. Steel swords. What do you think about that?
That's a hard one, because there is a place called Iron Hill just north of this, right by the top of the Delmarva Peninsula, but in the peninsula itself, there's no metal. I don't know. The only thing that they could get it from is the Jaredites, because the Jaredites did live in that area. They could have been leaving things. They obviously had, stuff that they had that could have been left over. I don't know why Nephi doesn't say I found something and then smoldered it down, but that is a problem, that there's no, in that area, the metal.
So you acknowledge that. What about gold plates and silver? Because Nephi supposedly...
Yeah, we have copper being found there, just, again, like trades and stuff, we would have to, there's not.
Do you have any copper plates or anything, or gold plates?
No, I wish I did. I think I know where they are. I'm going to go look. I haven't been back there yet, so I'll go look for them. I'll get back to you.
You did mention to me also something about a two Cumorah theory.
Okay.
Of course, the Heartlanders are going to hate that, but yours is actually...
You can have one Cumorah. From what I've read, so the Seneca, I was reading about the Seneca Indians, and they believed that they originated around 400 AD, and there's this hill that they feel like they came from, and there's this tradition about this hill. Well, first off, there's I think it was 1828 is the first reference. So before the Book of Mormon time, it talks about there was this fort on top of this hill, and we think it's Bear Hill is what they're talking about.
Bear Hill?
Bear, B-A-R-E, because there wasn't a lot of trees growing. But the Seneca Indians say that there was a fort there, and it was used. It could be eventually it was used as a military thing, that they could stand up here, and because it was cleared, they could see enemies. But they actually built some structure. And I read, and I wish I had the reference, but I read that the Senecas believed that it wasn't them that built it, it was built earlier. So that, again, fits the Jaredites building it, because they called it Hill Rama, and that's the same hill as Hill Cumorah. And the Senecas believed that they didn't build the fort, that it was built before them. And so that fits, that the Jaredites would have built the fort that they then used later on. Can we find that fort now? No, because there's Wikipedia, which my 12-year-old son says that's not a good source, but says that in 1920 it was used as like a filler, for roads. Like they dug up the fort and were just using it for filling road stuff.
Okay.
Filler. But then I've read other places. This is why I need to go back there and check it out for myself. That there is remnants of a fort being there, and they use it also like as a council place. It's like a sacred site. I also wonder if there's two hills, like if the Lamanites had a hill, because there are two hills kind of closest together that kind of fit the description. So I believe that there's the hill Cumorah where the plates were buried, where Joseph Smith got the plates, might not have been the battle site. That there's another hill that makes more sense, that had a fort, that supposedly had a fort built upon it, that was built not in 400, that was built earlier than 400 AD, that the Senecas believed that was built by another people. And that makes more sense that Moroni would take the records, and it's actually only like 10 to 20 miles from the hill Cumorah. But it's a distance away. You wouldn't bury it where you just had a battle. That makes sense to me. That's what the Meso people say. Why would you bury it in a place where the Lamanites are around there and could know that you were there? So here Moroni would have taken him to a different hill and buried him. And that makes perfect sense. I'm
trying to think of what else. Oh, populations. Yeah. Is the population of, because one of the knocks against Baja is that it just didn't support the population. Is the population big enough on Delmarva?
So the problem is we don't have a good source. There's a variety of how many people were there when it was colonized by, in colonial times. And so, but we do know there was the Little Ice Age from 1450 to 1850. So that's going to affect the population. But
AD?
AD, yeah. So when like John Smith and those guys came, they struggled partly because like they were still coming out of this like devastation with the land so they wouldn't have survived without the natives being there. But even the natives were struggling at that point, and that's documented. But there is a word. So let's see if I can find it. Yeah. So Powhatan, which is what Pocahontas's, dad. It's a title. People think that Powhatan is, I'm probably not saying his name right, is his name, but it's a title. And he called the area the land of, which like the land of Zarahemla area, Tisnacomac, which it roughly translated as densely inhabited land. So this land in particular, like the natives believed that this was a densely populated land. So it could support. It did have, they obviously grew things, but it had a lot of like fish. What I'm trying to think of the right words, shellfish. All those things that could have enough protein and support them. I know Brant Gardner, as I've discussed this with him, and he doesn't think that it could support the land. But just from what I've read, like they thought they were a densely populated place. And all the wars, they obviously took people from further out too, coming from the land northward. And the Lamanites had spread, and when they had these battles, they would gather people. At the very end, Mormon himself comes from the land northward for those battles. So, I think it was densely populated, and there was also reason to get people from other land.
I mean, do we have any? When you read, so this is another good question, because I've talked to like different people, and some people are, because Mormon lost his 10,000, this 10,000, this 10,000. You add them up and it's like 250,000 people died. Do we have any evidence of, and then other people are saying, those numbers are exaggerated.
Yeah.
So first of all, do you think the numbers are exaggerated, or do you believe in those final battles 250,000 people died?
Well, the final battles, for sure, they could be that many. Because again, the final battle, like Cumorah battle, they were gathering people from all over.
And so that would have taken place in the New York area?
Yeah. Yeah,
one of the big knocks on that is, shouldn't we be finding mass graves and bones and things like that?
No, because they didn't no, I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have found some bones, but I don't think so. Again, just decomposition. So they have fo I think there was a study on decomposition rates and in different areas. Especially now, I wouldn't expect you to find, we can't even find our elephants. How are we going to find these? And again, not to joke about it, but mastodons, like we find one, right? And there should have been more than one. Like we find evidence of one or two things.
But like if you had, say, 1 million people, shouldn't they, you should be able to find those kinds of cities, right? Even if everybody died.
Okay, so,
like Jamestown, is that what it was? Or Roanoke, where like everybody just disappeared. They found the city, but they don't know where everybody is.
Kind of. Well, I think, I don't know about particulars on that one, but I know it was hard for them to find like the lost city. Like they didn't know exactly where it was. But my husband watches this archaeology show. It's done in Europe, and they have super documented, like Roman times. They know exactly where it is, and they can barely find any evidence of it. Like I had to find the name of the show, but it's even if you know like all the details of exactly where you're looking, and you're digging, and you're like, okay, maybe this is the line of this. And sometimes they can find things, but really, a lot of it is harder to find. And they have found like post holes and stuff like that goes back to the time, so they know that there was like structures there. But to find like all the bones and all the layout is the earth changes too much. Like you can't, like, I'm gonna have to find that name of that show, because it shows that like well documented places are hard to find. So here's the Book of Mormon where we're not even quite sure. We might be off a few miles, and it's going to be really hard to find it. Okay. So.
The critics are going to say,
I don't know. Go watch that show. Go watch the archaeology show. Like, it's not as clear-cut as people think. Like, there should be evidence of this, but no, there's not. Even well-documented stuff, there's not.
Okay. Is there anything else I'm trying to remember that we need to talk about?
So we talked about Pig Point. I do want to say, so I want to read a little thing about Pig Point there's a couple articles about it, and one of them says, just to show you that there are hills near Sidon, because that's really important, because there's battles near the head of Sidon, and there was an army hiding behind a hill, right? And so we have to have a hill next to it. And since I haven't been out back there, I'm just relying on what other people say. But this was an article about Pig Point, and it said, from the hilltop, Dr. Lunkenbach took in the view of the river below, and this is right where my head of Sidon is, the broad flats of the bank, the same view as when the mysterious gathering took place at Pig Point thousands of years ago. It could well have been a camp down there. He gestured towards the next hill upriver, musing what it might hide. You look at the next little bluff and the one next to that, and you might look at all these places to figure out how it all pieces together. So it was longer than I thought. So it's interesting that they're on a hill and they're looking down. There's like they even said like, oh, I wonder if I could see an army camp, or not an army, but I could see like people camping down here, right next to where I need to be. An army could definitely hide behind there. And then on the other side, just looking at a topography graph, I've seen that there is like a West Valley, which the other armies, so there was two armies, right, Lehi and Captain Moroni, like they had on either side of the river Sidon. So you have to have hills on both sides, and a valley, a West Valley, so there has to be hills on that side, and it's exactly where it is, right where it needs to be. And I guess the other thing I'd want to say, just going back to Pig Point, is just that they said the biggest surprise has been the wide distribution of artifacts. It's everywhere, Cox said. The archaeology team approached, I don't know if I need to read that whole thing, but they were just saying they dug, so they usually make these grids and they dig and they find, a couple things scattered around. They said they made these grids. It says we dug 450 test pits over a quarter of a mile, and nearly every one of them had an artifact. So going back to this, could it support this many people? They're finding like so much artifacts that it surprised the archaeologists. They weren't expecting that. So it obviously had a lot of people at that time period. And what they're saying is the biggest, like the most artifacts they were finding was I should find the actual years. It was like 230 BC to 300 AD, so right around that Book of Mormon time when it would be populated the most. So
okay.
That again fits.
I can't believe I didn't ask this question sooner. Yeah. Where's the narrow neck of land?
Yeah, so the narrow neck's at the top of the Delmarva, and it is the one that's like a day's journey. So it's like 14 miles or so.
The top of the Delmarva Peninsula is 14 miles?
Yeah.
Okay.
14 to 20 miles, depending on where exactly you're drawing them out.
That's pretty...
It's pretty short.
Pretty
it's a day's
wide.
journey. I know.
Wow.
And so it says a day's journey for a Nephite. And so is a Nephite like this marathon person that does 100 and whatever miles in one day? Or is it someone that grows their crops and 14 miles makes me tired? Like, that's a long distance, right?
Yeah.
Like, so it just depends how you define for a Nephite, I guess. The thing with the narrow pass is it says there's... In Alma 50, it talks about these people in the city of Morianton, that they were having this conflict with the people of Lehi, and then they end up trying to go up to the land northward, right? And there was a woman that escapes and goes over and tells Captain Moroni, and he goes, and this again would be like sending a runner across the bay over to Teancum, who is in Bountiful, right? So Morianton is going to go up through the narrow pass. It says that Teancum gets word that these people are coming, and so Moroni says, stop them before they get to the land northward. And he says they heads them. So what I have is he's coming from Bountiful, and he's coming over, the narrow pass would be the way into the land southward, into like the Zarahemla part. And it's narrow because there's a place where that fall line is. It's like kind of cuts close to the river, and so that would be like the easy path, would be where you don't have like so much hills, and that would be like the easy way into the land northward from the land of Zarahemla. Okay. So what's perfect though is it says they head them, and if any other place you'd have like Bountiful here and Morianton here, and they're kind of like racing towards it, or so they might be chasing them, or how do they head them? But this way they like head them at. It says that they head them at the narrow pass. And one other thing where it talks about that makes sense with this is in Ether it talks about these snakes. Do you remember the snake thing? So it talks about how they were driven into the land southward, but it says to Zarahemla. It doesn't say to Bountiful, but Bountiful, if you recall, goes from an east sea all the way to the west sea. So why do they say it went to Zarahemla and not to Bountiful? It'd have to go through Bountiful to get to Zarahemla if the boundary is right there. So that's just interesting that it's showing that there's two distinct lands here. Then the snakes were driven towards Zarahemla in the land southward and not to Bountiful. So again, just another little tidbit things that makes everything make more sense.
So is there a lot of snakes in that area?
There are snakes in that area. I don't know if there's a lot of snakes, and they were driven and killed by Lib, so I don't know if that species survived Lib, the Jaredite. So, but there are snakes for sure in that area.
Okay. I'm trying to remember if there's anything else. Is there anything
There's
else
so
we can
much
talk about?
more. There's so much more. I can't. Yeah, I will start updating my blog if anyone wants to learn more. Just ask questions and.
Okay. Give us your blog again.
It's bomland@blogspot.com.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I'm out of questions. So Laura Hathaway, I thank you so much for being here on Gospel Tangents, and encourage you guys, if you're interested in this, check it out.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Laura Hathaway. Laura, thank you for sitting down with me and telling us more about your theory. I encourage you guys to check it out at bomland.blogspot.com. In our next conversation, I'm excited to have Val Larson on. He's going to tell us about the Book of Mormon and why he thinks there's some information in there that we don't typically recognize.
One important thesis of my research is that theosis, man becoming fully like God, is a Book of Mormon doctrine.
Oh, wow.
A doctrine that entails the existence of a divine mother who, with the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, facilitates the deification of her children. To see this, we need to understand that the Book of Mormon opens in the pivotal moment in theological history, the very moment when the theology we Latter-day Saints hold today diverges from that of Judaism, Islam, and Orthodox Christianity.
Thanks for listening to Gospel Tangents. If you'd like to support me, please subscribe at gospeltangents.com or on patreon.com/gospeltangents, or you can watch entire videos at youtube.com/gospeltangents. I really can't do this without your support. I'd love to do it full time, and I need a lot more people that are willing to help me out. So I'd really appreciate that. So thanks again for listening, and don't forget to check out some of our other videos.